G'day everyone, and welcome back to Osahra. Today's episode, well, I'm going to kick things off with some cinematics to show off El-Kenem and all the progress we've made over the last 7 months. However, there's been a spot that's always really bothered me right next to the palace that Skip built a couple of episodes ago. Not even a couple, a long time ago. We've been working on this for so long, and there's this one spot that's always bothered me, this one area that we haven't really ever filled, and I've been looking at it for ages because I've never really known exactly what to put in this location. With the palace so close by, it made me think that maybe some tourist attractions should go here, some hotels, or even because it's so close to the historical center, maybe some more of a European influence in terms of the architecture. And then we also have this slum area that I built ages and ages ago, and I've always loved this style of building, and it really matches the historicalness of El-Kenem, because, you know, back in the day, this is what it really would have looked like when it started sprawling out into the city. So I decided to go with a bit of pretty much everything. I'm going to focus on mostly building that historical slum and a lot of those, smaller, really tight communities that are, looks like basically houses on top of houses. However, I didn't want to just make this like a giant sprawling scene of that, because we do already have a couple of areas like that. And I wanted this area to also have a lot of high rises, some older high rises and some newer ones. And right now I'm working on the newer ones. And you're probably thinking that they're not quite as new as I'm describing them out to be. Well, I wanted this block to have the feeling of like a new development. However, probably not the greatest looking new development, and maybe it was a new development back in the 70s or something. But I really wanted to establish that feel in this area where we have high rise of some sort of more modern style of high rise, which is the ones I'm building. Then I'm going to do some far older high rise buildings around this area, and then I'm also going to have this really low community area. So basically like 3 different types of residential districts within this area, and I really wanted to have that look of them all on top of each other. Just so happens to be that apartment blocks are just all on top of each other, just realizing I'm saying that now. But I did kind of feel like the development around the palace would probably be more modern than anywhere else around the city. And this one little district here is probably just designated for suburbs, and not suburbs in terms of houses, but suburbs in terms of like very tight city-based living. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, even though we really don't need any more residents in Osahra at the moment. We are screaming for some industry, which I was going to do in this episode. However, I don't know, you just gotta go with whatever inspiration you have at the moment, and that's just got a real residential vibe at the moment, so I couldn't help but just build off that. And what you see me rebuild right now is this is like the older style apartment blocks that I wanted to establish, and these I haven't actually really placed these down yet in Osahra. I haven't placed them down anywhere in Cities Skylines at all, so it was pretty cool working with them because I think they look so damn cool, and they are really exactly totally what we are after in this area. So I'm going to use this building a lot. This apartment block, there's actually 3 of them. They're slightly varied, but just by using Move It, I can splice them together to get a couple of different differences. God, you can tell it's the end of the day, can't you? My English isn't quite on point as it usually is. It never is. Who am I kidding? What I'm doing right now is I'm detailing just a little bit of the underneath parts of it. I didn't want to go too crazy because, if we're ever going to make any major developments in Osahra, in El-Kenem, then we really just need to focus on getting a lot of the buildings and a lot of the city established. So I'm just going for some seriously light detailing. Some areas I might detail quite a lot, other areas I just don't. This is something I do in pretty much every series that I am running at the moment. And I'll detail some very interesting areas, but then I am not going to detail the entire thing. It's just not a workable process. And plus, after building this block, I was pretty sick of it. Like I'd had enough of building some residence. And that's because, you know, there's only so much of this plopping you can do. And then now I'm probably more in like a different mood in terms of what I want to build. So, you know, it's really important to keep it fun. You don't want to start making this a chore. It's definitely not a chore, but every now and again, plopping down some props just makes you go, God, I really don't feel like doing it. And it's not really something you need to be doing. So I am using trees a lot to put in some extra details and really change things up. And I think it works really nicely. But I do also really like having some trash piles underneath these apartments because a lot of people live around here, and I don't think the trash pickup is quite as good as it probably should be, especially around these very high residential areas. So lots of trash piles in between these apartments, and also some playgrounds just to serve those places. At the moment, I am now plopping down the third type of community that I'm building, and that is the smaller, more historical types of building. And when I say historical, it's because these buildings are very, very old. I know they're like probably considered as a slum. A lot of people are probably thinking that they would classify these as a slum. However, I don't really like the term slum. I think that this is probably more of like a historical center, and in terms of how the city used to look and how it used to operate, you know, the city would have looked like this a lot. And you know, I've been to quite a few countries with districts and areas that look like this, and a lot of them are kind of being demolished and turned into these apartment blocks, and that is not uncommon. And I find that really quite sad because these areas play a really massive part in history in telling the story of the city. So I do hate to see these areas being demolished. However, they do kind of open up more opportunities in terms of places for people to live, and, you know, fresh water and electricity and all that stuff that apartment and, you know, the growth of a city sort of provides opportunity for. However, there is so much history and culture and family within these small communities that I think condensed into these areas, that I think that it's so sad to see them get demolished and lost. I don't know. I think that's kind of an interesting point, and something that I always wonder about when I go and visit other countries and see other places. And it's quite similar in Sydney, actually, where, you know, a lot of these style of buildings that are much older and much more probably run down in terms of, well, it compared to these more modern day apartments. And they're the ones that get demolished because, you know, you can't fit as many people in there, or they're getting really old. And I always hate seeing new apartment blocks take over what was once probably a more historical area. And, you know, it's just the way things happen, the way the world works. And I don't know, that's just my sharing with you guys. And that was sort of my mind frame when building this district, this whole area at the moment, because, you know, I was sort of thinking about the progress in El-Kanem and how all this has been changed over the last few years, and how those new apartment blocks have probably been developed, and what the future holds for these areas around El-Kanem. Because, you know, as cities sort of become much larger, these areas within the center of the cities become way more focused for the wealthier people, or people who can actually afford to live in cities, bigger businesses and all that sort of stuff. You know, back in the days, cities were not considered very nice to live in. They were slums and they weren't nice. Whereas these days, it's kind of, you know, that's just the way it works. Like, cities are now hot property. So it's kind of interesting. That's sort of my way of thinking when building in this area. Well, what a ramble about some random stuff. What I'm doing right now is I'm trying to really keep down the time in terms of how much time and effort I spend putting into these areas. If I was to plop down all the new buildings for this district, it would take forever, and I really didn't want to waste hours just plopping down these buildings, which it would have taken if I wanted to make this completely unique. So I'm using Mavic quite a lot to find areas of interest, and just copying and pasting them and rotating and deleting just specific elements to just change up and make little places unique. So that's what I'm doing here. It's a technique that I use quite a lot. It's not always perfect. You might even notice in the cinematics that there are some buildings turned around, or you might even see some buildings not even connected to a road. Well, you know, it's just sort of the price you pay for doing stuff like this. However, the payoff is that, you know, if I was to place down all these buildings, I would just have one block done. Whereas placing down and copying like I am doing right now, it means that I can finish this whole build in an afternoon, and it means that we're actually going to finish Elkenham and not be totally over it by the time before this series is finished. So yeah, I'm sort of just placing these down quite randomly, but also with a bit of method to my madness. The method is I'm trying to make it look like these blocks are starting to be taken over by these apartments, and you know, it's slowly kind of happening. They're creeping in. You know, maybe one area of these smaller buildings are demolished to make way for these apartments. Whereas those, the ones that I built at the very beginning of the episode, there's more modern ones. It's almost like they've just demolished the entire block, you know, or like 3 blocks, and one company has just taken over that block and created these apartments. So that was sort of my technique for that area. Whereas this one is sort of like, it's like a gradual takeover of with these apartment blocks. I think they look really cool, and you know, I'm trying to keep with sort of the flow of a city, of a natural city. So within these areas, I'm trying to have a lot of commerce around the main roads, whereas a lot of the residents sort of live within these more dirt roads and smaller areas within that block. And then I'm also putting in some market stores, because markets are play quite a big part in these areas within the world. So, you know, I wanted to establish a lot of the marketplace for this, and also there's a bit of a sense of community, which is kind of a strange way of thinking in terms of a game. But, you know, when trying to build a district, when trying to build residents in particular, you have to think about the culture and what people are doing, and whether there is a strong sense of community. You know, I feel like in this area there will be heaps, you know, there'll be so many families living in this area, and probably don't even venture out much past the city. Not much past the city, venture far into the city. And most of what they do probably lies around just this one block, which is quite cool. And I wanted to sort of keep it in that sense. And also we're sort of creeping further and further out of the city, we're still quite far in the city, but I wanted to make it look like as it got further away from the historical center and further away from the financial district, these houses sort of became a little bit more wild, a little bit less structured, and more kind of based around farm, the style of a farm. I don't really get into that too much in this episode. However, I might continue building in this area in the next one. I don't know what Skip's going to do in the next episode. However, some asset creator has actually created some very unique props for Elkenham, and I don't want to give too much away because that is totally your Skip. So definitely tune in to Skip's episode on his channel next week. He's got some very, very cool surprises up his sleeve. I am assuming, but we are both very excited about these props that have been created for us. So if you've got some ideas, definitely hit us up in the comments section. But I personally can't wait to see where he ends up putting those props. But yeah, I mean, this pretty much the idea behind this whole build was to build, to really build out this area and to play with a lot of techniques that I've been sort of thinking about in my head, and I actually got to put them into play. One of those techniques is I wanted to copy and paste these communities. However, I didn't want to paste all the props. These are so prop heavy. I used so many props a few episodes ago when I built these areas, and I didn't want to copy all of them because, to be honest, these areas would not get as much attention from us as other areas will. So I don't want to go too prop heavy, and I don't want to copy all that hardcore props that I've been using for the more detailed areas. This district is probably a little less detailed, although you're probably looking at it thinking, dude, this is crazy detailed. Well, it is, but In terms of like how detailed Skip and I usually go in our builds, there's like no props involved. There's trees involved in these like last blocks, but there are no props. It's just all trees, all buildings. And I wanted to keep it that way because of a couple of reasons. One, we don't have all the props in the world. And two, if I'm going to build anything if I'm ever going to finish building this damn city, we need to seriously just smash out some work. And that's what today's episode was all about. Smashing out some work, getting some progress, and making it look awesome in the meantime. And I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. And you can be the judge of how awesome it turned out, because the cinematics are just around the corner and they are really cool, so definitely stick around for that. I don't know why you would disappear. We've only got about 30 seconds left on the time lapse. It is a slightly shorter episode than usual. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Next episode is going to be up on Skip's channel. He's just around the corner next week. I really can't wait to see what he gets up to. But if you like this video, definitely show your appreciation by hitting that like button. But guys, that is it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.